This episode is sponsored by Utopia and Sharpstick, a bold and insightful new original comedy from writer-director Lena Dunham that Vanity Fair calls a supremely funny film. Starring Christine Froseth and John Bernthal, Sharpstick opens in theaters in New York and Los Angeles July 29th, featuring opening weekend Q&As with Dunham after select shows. Expands nationwide August 5th. Get tickets now at sharpstickmovie.com.
I really think that celebrity is a kind of poison. And, you can sustain small levels of it, but if you drink a lot of it, you turn into Michael Jackson, Elvis, Brando. It's just, these are good, fine people who are great artists who just drink a shit ton of poison. Then the poison is ego, is seeing yourself in the third person. And when Newman said that, it's like, I understand everybody wants me to be quote unquote Paul Newman, but I'm actually a person. And I'm actually an actor. And I think he went to war against it. When you look at Judge Roy Bean, when you look at Slapshot, when you look at Buffalo Bill and the Indians, you see a guy angry at the role he's being asked to play. And he's just, he's shaking it. He's just wrestling with that yoke of Paul Newman.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Ethan Hawke is an actor. This is his second time on Back to One. His first time was episode 41. I sat down with him in his office in Brooklyn to talk about his new documentary series, The Last Movie Stars, about Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward.
You pulled off a feat here with this series. You made an interesting documentary about two people's lives and career, which is hard enough to do as a documentary. Documentaries are the hardest things to make. So just having that as an interesting thing, success, miracle work. But then it's also at the same time a complete celebration of the endeavor of acting, a constant celebration of the endeavor of acting, which I'll talk about. And then it's also an incredible document of this enduring love, all at the same time, that are equally strong, man. I don't know how you did it. I was loving this so much that I began to panic about it ending. I swear. And I began to savor it. What I would like to know, first off, is if a child of a potential subject of a documentary came to me and said, I would like you to make a documentary on this subject, I would say immediately no. No way. Yeah. I don't care who it is, someone I love or someone I respect or someone I want to know about. I don't care what kind of tools I have available to myself, what kind of money they're throwing at me. Because if they would leave me alone to tell the story, great. But everyone that's watching would think, oh, the child is controlling this or somehow or something, right? This didn't feel that way at all because of what you get into. But was that a worry when that came to you, first off?
Everything about making a documentary is a worry. I love a good one when I see them. And I do feel like we're living in an amazing age for documentary because filmmaking is so much cheaper, editing is so much cheaper. We have so many tools that what used to be unbelievably expensive is now not. So you can do it. But the truth, like nonfiction, is so hard because as a storyteller, you have to have an angle. You have to have a point of view. You have to manipulate the truth. But if you manipulate it too much, you're dishonest. So there's that whole honesty element because life doesn't have a narrative. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. It's these accumulation of days, and 1 minute you think you're failing and it turns out that was the greatest moment of your life. And 1 minute you think you're succeeding. Turns out that was when you fell. Life is so confusing. So to try to make sense out of it, like there's some authority that knows the truth and there's one truth, is really difficult.
Yeah.
And now the part that you're talking about, these kids want this story and they're gonna, it was a positive and a negative, right? The Lord giveth way. One of the things that made me say yes was the things I've directed have always been my idea, my little concept, my thing. And so a lot of times I end up having to pay for it myself. So like I made this one documentary, Seymour, an Introduction, about a piano maestro. And, but that was scary because like I cut that. I mean, I had to find an editor and pay them and work with them. And I would use the money I made from acting to do it. And so you keep wondering, like, is this like some weird drug habit, where I'm just pouring money down a black hole and this thing's never going to come out? But so somebody else said, I'll pay for an editor. Well, that's interesting to me, because now it's like, okay, this doesn't cost me anything but time.
Yeah.
And so it won't. Now, the fact that person is a child was an immense concern. And so my wife and I went and had a meeting at their office, and it's Paul and Joanne's old office. They still have it, so there's a poster of Hustler on the wall and this big leather chair. You feel the vibrations of a powerful past in this room. You understand that, I bet Scorsese's been in this room. I bet Redford's been in this. It somehow bristles with that kind of. And I had to say, look, I can only do this if I need to be able to tell the truth. And there is no light without shadow. So I can't go do a couple years work to have you tell me you can't say that if it's true.
Yes.
I said, I won't, you can tell me you can't say that if it's not true.
Right.
But that I really felt if they didn't want to make an accurate portrait, then I didn't want to do it.
Yes.
Because Paul and Joanne don't need a puff piece. I was like, and they don't need somebody to come cut them at the ankles either and mock them and make that's unnecessary. But they certainly don't need a puff piece. The internet is full of like the most amazing couple ever, you know. And I knew just a base knowledge of human beings that I'm sure it wasn't all sunshine and roses, because no thing is. And they said yes. They had this idea that maybe another actor would be the right director for it because their parents were fundamentally, bottom line, actors. Yeah. That's what they did with their life. They dedicated their whole life to it. And people like to talk about them as philanthropists, or people like to talk to them about a couple, or as quote unquote important people or celebrities, these kind of words. But they're really not that. They really were two people in love with acting and did it at a very high level for a really sustained period of time. And so they thought, like, if I could do for them what we did for Seymour, which is do a portrait of an artist, then they would trust me. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm really interested in how the hell do you make Three Faces of Eve in the 50s and make Mr. and Mrs. Bridge in the 90s and have a sustained, how do you carry on for 50 years at that level? That's what interested me. I was turning 50, and I felt like the universe kind of plopped this in my lap to say, like, well, you want to look at it might be a great moment to take a really hard look at what my profession is. And so that stuff was really attractive to me. But when I think back now on saying yes, if I knew how hard it was going to be, I would have said no. It broke my brain. Like, I really appreciate the compliments that you paid and that it worked for you in that way. I've done some challenging things, like, when I think back on the first conversation with the Linklater about Boyhood, like, I think we were lunatics to think that we could make a short film every 12 years and that the kid would keep showing up. Like, were we nuts? Yeah. But somehow it worked out. Or, I've written a couple novels. That's super hard to do. Like, just, even if you're not talented, it's really hard. And so, meaning, like, to hold all those paragraphs in your brain at like one time and go like, oh, right, I already used that word 4 times. Like, it just breaks your brain a little bit. Nothing broke my brain like this, because it was really easy to get distracted. Meaning, like, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is super fun and interesting. Race car driving is super fun and interesting. They lost a child. That's really painful. You can go down the rabbit hole. You can go down they gave away
so many rabbit holes here.
They gave away so much more money than people know because they didn't want to advertise. They were like kind of old fashioned that way. Like you're not supposed to advertise how much money you give away. And they gave away a lot of money. And so that level of philanthropy is really rare in the arts. Like, billionaires give away lots of money, right? Like this guy who runs Microsoft or whatever gives away a lot. But Newman and Woodward gave away more money than they have. So it's what's interesting about it. If they give away $500 million, they only have $7 million bucks.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's the ratio is what's breathtaking about it.
Right.
And so that's a rabbit hole.
Right.
Then there's the love affair. And you can, if you're a romantic like me, you can geek out about that.
Right.
And you can totally miss Color of Money or The Verdict or, or that she was the artistic director of an incredibly successful theater company. And then I found it incredibly fascinating that there was this thing I wanted to have the documentary feel like, which was when I first arrived in New York, they were very meaningful to me. I didn't know them, but I would see them at opening. And the idea that she loved him made, like, a lot of movie stars are glamorous and cool and everything, but they don't have a 50-year love affair with a really powerful woman in their life who really loves them. And there's something I found as a young person really unattractive about success. I just found most people who are rich and most people, like, they just got so pompous and so full of themselves and so, like, I just felt like, God, success is the worst thing to happen to people because they just turn into blowhards. But she loved him, so he must be all right. And he loved her, and she was an old-fashioned actor's actor. And she's teaching class at workshops, and she's doing plays up at Williamstown where she's not even the lead, in little TV movies. You're thinking, well, wait, if he loves her, he must really respect acting. Yeah. Because she's good at it. But society's not, he wasn't married to, Gina Lollobrigida or something like that, And so I just felt like their love of each other spoke well of the other, and I thought, I want the documentary to capture that, because as an actor, what that means is you're worthy of respect if you're successful, and you're worthy of respect if you're not, if your aim is true. So it's the aim that is the essential element. Yes. And I found that really appealing about the two of them. So I was like, okay. But then you start getting into, oh wow, Robert Altman asked Paul Newman to improvise in his 50s for the first time. And he did it. Like I have a 20-minute section on Buffalo Bill and the Indians I had to cut out because the actor in me went, wow, we could pick any number of famous studly movie stars that don't see Nashville and say, I want to be in a movie like that. And I want a director to make me improvise. And I want a director, I'm going to do Newman and Buffalo Bill and the Indians does the most unflattering self-portrait in the history of cinema. I mean, he's mocking his own success and in a way that is really revelatory. And when I first was like showing the movie to the producing team and everything, they were like, why do you have 20 minutes on Buffalo Bill and the Indians? Everyone hated that movie when it came out. They're going to hate it now. You've got 15 minutes on WUSA. There are 5 people on the planet Earth who made it to the end of that movie. Are you nuts? And I felt the artist in me felt like if you don't understand failure, you don't understand success. And that if you, I don't want to make a movie that seems like every thing that they pissed gold or whatever. And so then your brain starts to break.
Yes.
And then you talk to the kids to say you can't leave out mom's knitting. It's if you don't understand the knitting, you don't understand mom. And I'm like, okay, I don't understand knitting. And and so I'd have to go, Laura Linney, help me understand knitting. because I kind of, and then you realize the male-female bias, right? Because I would, some of the first cuts of the doc, my wife would say, I don't care about race car driving. And I'm like, it's so cool. She's like, it's not cool to me. And she's like, I want to know more about running the theater company and what Joanne's doing. You're you think these shots of Newman and Redford are unendingly interesting. And they're not. And I'm like, yes, they are. It's cool. It's Butcher Sundance. So you start learning a lot about your own biases. And so it's really, really hard to do this. And if I had it to do over again, I know I wouldn't, because there were nights where I just went to bed at sea. And so, but eventually, it's one of those weird things. Like, I really believe in this. There's a current when you're doing anything, and if you can find that current, it will guide you. Like my editor, this guy Barry Polterman, this guy gave two solid years of his life to this, and we just had to start listening to the river and be like, because I really could. The actor in me could make a full documentary about the Actors Studio 1951 to 56 or something like that, because they changed the world. And I really believe they changed the nature of storytelling and the acting all over the world. I mean, you don't have Gerard Depardieu if you don't have the Actors Studio, and obviously they were connected to what happened in Russia 50 years earlier. It's all part of a line that's still happening. But I couldn't get trapped there, because they didn't get trapped there. I mean, that moment passed. Right. That moment, like any movement in arts, it kind of vibrates to the world and then it becomes something else. Yeah. I've been reading. Have you read this book, The Method?
Yes.
It's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I love what Stanislavski talks about, how like we all know we can point to what bad writing is and say, in literature, you like, that is a corny sentence. And we all see Marlon Brando in Streetcar and we're like, wow, so that's good acting. What can I teach it? Because you can teach literature, and and you can teach acting. That's we all grow up thinking, oh, I can't sing. Well, funnily enough, I can't help you be Nina Simone, but you can learn to carry a tune. Yeah. You can learn rhythm. You can, and the same is true of acting. And so I don't know. I'm riffing here wildly, but this is a very long answer to why my brain was broken.
Yeah.
And, and I ended up having to give, I had no intention of using Zooms in the movie, no intention. And I started putting them in as placeholders. And then.
Okay, wait. I just have to tell you, because you just said that. The idea of Zoom being in a movie, I would say, I don't even want to watch it.
Yeah, me too.
But it's used so well in this. Maybe it's because you thought it was going to be a placeholder. You didn't have somebody do a nice composition or change the background, or have Josh turn on his light in the back.
Didn't tell anybody to comb their hair.
So it felt like you're watching a couple friends on a Zoom. Okay, and that matters to this series.
It matters a lot, because it's like, why now? What I started realizing is, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about happened 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. So it's like, why do you got to think about it now? Why is it relevant to your life now? And there was something hypnotizing about watching Sam Rockwell get out of bed and remember lines from Cool Hand Luke. Because he didn't prep. You can tell by the way we're talking that I wasn't like, hey, he didn't like Wikipedia Cool Hand Luke, and you see him remember a scene from The Sting, and you realize like, oh, right. So we wouldn't have Sam Rockwell. Like, it's all connected. Yes. The breakthrough, when I started realizing I wanted to use it, was Zooming with D'Onofrio. He's been a huge influence on me as an acting teacher and a lover of a respect for acting. And so I was like, and he knows a lot more about the Actors Studio. I've been taught by him, but he really came up in the Actors Studio and he knows a lot about it. And I wanted him to really help me understand in depth what the method is and everything. And did the Zoom. I was talking to him and having a great time, and I wanted my editor to understand what we're talking about. Because if Newman says over and over again, all my success or failure, whatever, if you like or don't like me, you can blame it on the method. So it's like, if we were making a movie about Miles Davis, we would talk about music. Why can't I talk about the making of music? Why do I have to talk about the red carpet? Why can't I talk about what got him there? You know, and I showed it to my editor, and his name's Barry, and Barry's just like, I think this should be in the movie. This is really interesting, because I actually just learned, I now understand what Paul's talking about.
In 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds. And Scorsese said to me, he said, you know, I learned more in 90 seconds of Vincent D'Onofrio than a lifetime friendship with Keitel. I mean, Keitel's always saying the same thing, but he just doesn't say it succinctly. And so once that breakthrough happened of this idea of, you know what this movie's going to be? This movie's going to be one generation looking back on the one before. Yes. And that gets you to another idea, that Paul and Joanne don't exist in a vacuum. All of us are only as good as our generation. Yeah. So to talk about Newman, I got to talk about Altman. And I got to talk about Scorsese. And I got to talk about Martin Ritt. And I got to talk about Gore Vidal. And I got to talk about Shirley MacLaine. Like, you've got to know the context, because these people don't exist as independent elements. We are a community. And the Zoom says we are still.
That's right. Like it's even better than if you went over their house, Ethan. I mean, I'm really and had a good shots with them. Something I can't believe I'm saying that.
I know I can't. I can't believe it either, because I literally when we first had the idea of using it was like, okay, let's go to their house and film it.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you'll never get the moments. You know, there's a moment where Billy Crudup at the end says, it's hard to imagine they did this as people, because you think of them as legends already, but they actually, each day, they were just a person who could have done something else.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And those moments, I thought what Billy said was profound, but it happened spontaneousliely, and the spontaneity is what I think the audience is more important than if I went and got killer black and white shots. Like, I have this the thing about Paul and Joanne is they're in 50 years of some of the greatest filmmakers. Like, I got great shots. Yeah. Just rip them from Cool Hand Luke, or, you know, Color of Money, or Three Faces of Eve, or what have you.
Yeah. So when you realized that you wanted these translations of these interviews to be like the through line, right? And then casting these people to play this is also, I think, what makes this special, because this is what I mean by every single minute, moment to moment, we're both getting information about these two great actors and participating in a miracle of acting. Like, these people are acting these interviews.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know.
So we're actually in amongst the thing that you guys are loving and talking about.
Yeah, we're actually doing it right now.
Yes.
Like, George is going to play Paul Newman for you for a second.
Right. Right, and there's a certain art to this, you know. And the other thing, which is a big thank you that I have to say to you, as soon as it came on and I saw that you muddied the sound, so it sounds like a tape. That choice was so, I almost jumped for joy when you did that, because some people may not do that. Like, a producer might be like, we can't muddy it. This is George Clooney. Right. You know what I mean? We want to make this clean. Yeah. We'll get the point. No, it has to be muddied throughout, because we need the suspension of disbelief still.
I know. I told
that
everybody.
Has to happen.
I told everybody, like, pour yourself a drink. I want to hear the ice. If you smoke a cigarette, don't worry about the cars behind you.
Yes.
Don't worry about it. Like, if your kids are in the background, it's fine.
Yes.
You know, and when we first did it, everybody's like, well, you're going to re-record all that, right? Because I thought, you know, it was fascinating watching the actors, like for example, Billy Crudup plays the director of Winning, and he really went for it. At one point, the producer said, you have to re-record Billy's. I don't understand half the things he's saying. I'm like, I know, it's brilliant, because it sounds like a guy really talking. You know, half the time we don't understand but I loved it. And he just so got it. He seems to lose his train of thought and find it again. And I after Billy was done, I called him up and was like, dude, you've become a master at this. You're like a great actor.
Yeah.
Like, and Laura was the same way. You know, Steve Zahn plays Joanne's high school sweetheart, and it kind of breaks my heart. It's like, this should be a radio play. Well, I remember Joanne, and she had on this dress, and he commits to it wholly. And that, of course, we're watching because we're making a documentary about actors, and now we're watching actors do it.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. It's better. I know this is crazy. It's better than if you had the audio. I mean, really. It's better than that. Like, this is a great example of, wow, when you have a disaster happen, right? You can make something better out of it with art.
It's so weird. I have a game that I play with myself. It happened a long time ago where I was doing a movie that was really important to me. I loved it so much, and I loved the cast. I really wanted to do a good job, and there's a scene in it where the character is supposed to cry, and I was very young, and I found that really scary. The camera's gonna do this like long, slow push in on me as the tears drop. That's how it reads in the script, and you're like, oh my God, how the hell am I gonna do that? You know, I did all my training, and I went and sat by myself, and I meditated on this thing that had happened to me, and I really pictured this person I really cared about, and I really did this thing, and I really worked on it, and I nailed it, right? The camera's coming in, and right as they get close, the two tears drop, and I'm like, I nailed it. And the camera assistant went, oh shit. And the director's like, wait, I wasn't rolling. And then a part of me just died, you know? And I never could do that again.
Yeah.
And it's better because I didn't. It was freaking corny that I had the two freaking tears. Like, instead I was just like, fuck this camera assistant, fuck this movie, fuck these guys. And I just stared down the lens. And you know what? It was more honest. And I started having this feeling that I've carried with me, that whenever anything bad happens on set, you know, quote unquote bad, like camera doesn't roll, or the cloud goes over on this amazing shot, or the horse whinnies at the wrong moment, or the film was ruined in the lab, that it's somehow the universe saying you can do better. And I had an amazing moment once on set with Sam Shepard. Sam Shepard was playing the ghost in Hamlet, and Sam was very particular. He'd memorized this speech, and it's a beautiful speech, and he loved it, and Sam Shepard just adored Shakespeare, worshipped it, and worshipped the sounds and the rhythms, but the director wanted him to pick up in the middle of the speech, right? Sam couldn't, he had to start from the beginning. It was a long speech, you know, the director was like, and because of it, they kept rolling out. You know, so we were shooting it on 16, and the mags kept rolling out, and Sam lost his temper. I mean, he just, because they kept making him do it again and again and again, and he wanted to start from the beginning every time. It was just taking forever, right? And he lost his temper, and he cursed at some people and stormed out, you know, and then he came back in. And it was really beautiful. He's like, look, everybody, I'm working on myself. He's like, I just behaved really badly, and I did it because I'm not half as good an actor as I want to be, not because you guys are doing a bad job. And I really want to apologize to everybody and understand that I was just yelling at myself, and I need to start treating myself better and treating you better, and just give me another chance. And he just nailed it, you know, and like, I tell that story just because it was like, there is no failure. There's how you respond to failure. You know, so like you said, I do think if I had the audio tapes, I would have used them, and the movie would not be as good.
That's right.
Because you would miss the layer of getting to watch today's actors learn to act and play these people, which is way more interesting as far as a storytelling tool than just playing some old audio from 86.
Exactly. And that's what I responded to. Like, that's why I'm really saying I'm responding to three different things at the same time. going on. Now, maybe that's me, and I'm, fascinated by actors, acting. But Paul Newman is not in my top, 50 favorite actors when I first started this, and neither is Joanne Woodward. Maybe not even top 100. Like, the idea that I could be like, I don't want this to end with people like that. It's not like,
I know.
It's not like you made a documentary about one of my favorites. But now like
so
Judge Roy Bean is on TCM right at this moment, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm gonna miss that.
You gotta see that one. You gotta see that
Stuff
one.
like this.
But it's. Have you done this though? Like where, you think you don't like X musician, right? And you're on a road trip with a buddy, and they're like, Neil Young is the best. You're like, I don't like Neil Young, And they're like, well, let me start with.
Yes.
Do you know this album? Can we just listen to this one track? And you listen to it, and you kind of go, yeah, I kind of like that one. Well, and then he's like, well, let me play another one.
Yeah.
And then you start teaching your brain why Neil Young is awesome. And then all of them become interesting to you. And then something about his voice that used to annoy you doesn't annoy you anymore.
Yes.
And somebody's opened a window for it. And I think that I've had actors in my life where I just don't like that guy's face. I don't want to see movies in. I don't like his face.
Yeah.
And then something will happen, and I'll realize, that's my hang up.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with that guy's. That guy reminds me of somebody that was rude. I don't know what it is, and then somebody alters it. You get over it, and all of a sudden you start going, actually, I think that might be one of my favorites.
Yeah. And that's kind of what happened here with this. First of all, like Joanne Woodward now, like when Zoe Kazan says, honestly, I haven't seen any Joanne Woodward movies. Immediately, I'm like, young kids these days. And I'm like, wait. And I'm starting to think, I'm like, I've only seen Mrs. and Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. And I think Three Faces of Eve. I haven't seen anything else either. And then to see the work she's doing in here, man. The work you presented, I realized, I think I forgive actors moment to moment. Like they do something untrue for a second. Then they do something true. I forgive the other thing, right? I'm forgiving and loving. With her, it seems like there's no moment where you have to forgive. It's all...
that's what LaTanya Jackson, exactly what she said about her, is that you just never see her working.
Yeah.
You just never see her. Like, you see Paul Newman working all the time.
Yes.
Yes. He's just so goddamn photogenic that you forgive it constantly.
Exactly.
But I also find her career extremely interesting because the art of acting is mysterious. She did a lot of great work in very forgettable movies that didn't connect with the zeitgeist, movies that didn't. Three Faces of Eve is a brilliant performance in a film that's dated. We could watch HUD today, and it's still relevant. But that's not Paul Newman's credit. That's luck.
Yeah.
It's not just luck. He did it over and over again. So clearly he was good at team building. Clearly he was good at putting himself in a position to succeed. But also he had unbelievable opportunities. And one of the things about the life of an actor is we're only as good as our opportunities. Yes. And what I find brilliant about Joanne is she says, I'm not going to worry about how good my opportunities are, judge them. I'm going to take the ones presented to me. I'm not going to live in this fantasy world where I have the same opportunities as Shirley MacLaine. I'm being offered a TV movie, but it's a really mediocre script, but I can do something with this character. It's about a subject matter I care about. I can do something with this world. And I'm going to try. And the consistency with which she did that kept her getting more and more work, right? Yeah. And then late in life, she just dedicated herself to creating opportunities for other actors, whether it's Laura Linney or Allison Janney or Marissa Tomei or all those actors' lives she touched. Yeah. And so there's a humility in that.
Yeah.
And that humility is why you don't see her working. Linklater has this thing that he always says, is like, you do your best work when you're operating in a place of gratitude, of like, thank you, cinema gods, for letting me do this, and I am going to cherish this opportunity. I don't care what it is. I'm doing a play in a basement in Cleveland. You mentioned Austin Pendleton to me before we started. And Austin's always been a hero of mine because Austin will play, you give him a good part in Richard III in a room on the 48th floor of a midtown office building, or you pay for his flight to Seattle, he'll go play the fool, and he's like, and Sally Field says this about Joanne. It's not about who she's working about. It's just the work.
Yes. She
just wanted an opportunity to do what we do, and to hold a mirror up to nature. That's a prayer of sorts, because you're saying the second you do it that our life has value and meaning, our actions have value and meaning. There's that. I was really moved by it. I'm going to misquote it, but there was you remember Paul Scofield?
Yeah.
A great British actor. And at the end of his life, he was still acting at his local community theater. And he was really old. And somebody said, why aren't you doing this in the West End? Like, why aren't you doing this on Broadway? And he's like, because I've slowly realized that I'm really doing this for my maker. Like, whoever made me is who I've always been doing it for. And I would rather walk to work.
Wow.
Like I don't, and like once you start thinking like that, then you're like, wow, then it does I can learn monologues in my basement, and I can do them for my wife, or I can recite poetry for my family. And I don't know how it has value, but I know that it does.
Yes.
Yes. I heard somebody say, like, you want to fix the world? Just start by telling the truth.
Yes.
If you stop lying, because all the chaos is created by these half lies all the time, and if you yourself can just diminish your own half truths, you're going to start to heal the world.
Let's talk about some things that are still mysteries of him after I've seen this. Like, I don't, you mentioned the Actors Studio. I used to record at the Actors Studio in the mid-90s on a special program, and I wouldn't leave. Like, I kept doing it. Even after the program ended, I kept recording, and I was there. So I was there for 3 years, every session. And they used to talk about him. He was the president then.
He was the president, yeah.
They used to talk about him, but it's like waiting for Godot. I mean, like, he never showed up, ever. Like, Pacino was there.
Yeah.
That place felt like an old folks' home sometimes, like with insanity. Like, he said that's where it started for him, or you could blame that. But the idea of that not being a part of him, I was curious if you
I do. I find it really interesting because first of all, it's really beautiful. He was very upset that it seemed to have turned into an old age home, and that it wasn't the vibrating energy source that it was when he was young. And because I've read some of his journals about it, and it was both frustrating and inspiring. He wanted to try to rebuild that for young people, but he wasn't a teacher. He didn't feel good at that. And I find it interesting that when that generation was coming up, there were many famous acting teachers.
Yeah.
Like, are there any famous acting teachers right now? Like, Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, Uta Hagen, the other really famous one, Meisner.
Yeah.
We had world famous acting teachers. Now that tells you something about the way we relate to the craft of acting.
Yeah.
Which is, I was so moved. Lupita Nyong'o, like, when she won the Oscar, thanked her acting teacher. I was so glad that she did, because we all love this, like, myth of talent. Like, I was just born and I just played my part beautifully. I'm interesting because I am interesting, not because I learned how to tell stories and I understand, voice and movement, and I understand how to break down a scene and scene study and to admit that it's work.
Yes.
And I find at the end of his life, I think that's kind of what Gore Vidal means when he says they're the last movie stars. It's like the whole business was changing underneath them, and the culture around acting was changing. And I think what you're talking about with Paul at the Actors Studios, he wanted to bring back that spirit, but he wasn't connected with young people. And he didn't know who the new young people were who could do that, and where that spirit, for lack of, like the punk rock spirit of the theater.
Yeah.
Like where those guys were punks. You don't, if you find Arthur Penn talking about it, they were not good ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
They were hard living. They were trying to screw with their parents.
Yeah.
They were trying to be wild. And at the end of his life, the theater lacked that wildness.
Yeah.
That Tennessee had, August Wilson. There was people doing it at a high level, but everything is now about making money.
Yeah.
And when it turns into a business like that, some part of the art is getting pummeled.
Yeah.
And I think he was struggling with that because he's not Lee Strasberg. He didn't know how to be Lee Strasberg, but he wanted somebody to be. So he was giving a lot of money to it and said he would be president to help raise money and do all that. But he didn't know how to come. But Chino's much more, he speaks very beautifully about it. It's easier for him to be a good teacher.
Yeah.
I read Pacino's interviews all the time because he always says something I had never thought of before.
Yes. The whole idea, like, it's still kind of a mystery, the idea that, like, Paul would want to burn these tapes. Like, it's so dramatic, right? I don't know if you know the story. You probably did because you're doing so much research about Paul Newman's Lost film. That's short film.
The short film, the Chekhov thing.
Did you ever see it?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
it's terrific.
I saw it. Yeah, Jack Garfien showed it at the Film Society, and I went.
It's pretty good, isn't it?
It's really good.
Yeah, it was like that was another rabbit hole. I had a whole section on that short film, and my wife was like, "Ethan, it's already 6 hours."
But the story goes that he just handed that film to the actor and just said, "I want my name off this. I want my name off it." I mean, it's a really good short film. I feel like there's a connection there of like burning the tapes. Take this. I want my name off this. I don't want to be.
It's like there are things he says in that Clooney reads in that are brilliant writing. I mean, the guy is really smart. I've seen his watercolors and stuff.
Yeah.
He's like a really strangely gifted human being. Mm-hmm. But he was very self-lacerating and incredibly dubious of his own success, and had my editor said, "Why is he so humble about all these things? Like, why does he always say he's bad at this?" I'm like, I actually don't think it's humility. I think he's holding himself to an incredible, he doesn't think he's a bad actor. He just thinks he's not as good as Brando. And he's right.
Yeah.
It's not that he's so humble. It's that his aspiration for excellence is so high. Yeah. And so he was working with, he had worked with Elia Kazan, right? So he saw that short film and went, "Fuck, I'm not great."
Yeah.
Instead of looking at it and going, "Wow, you're really gifted. This is a great first short film. It's really wonderful. It's really interesting and bizarre and well shot."
Yeah. Great performance by that
guy. Great
performance,
yeah. And but that's the heart of his engine as a director. He loved that actor, and that's why he saw that actor do that in the studio. He just wanted to film it.
Yeah.
And that's the way he was with everything he directed, except Sometimes a Great Notion, came out of, I want to see Joanne play this part. So he directs Rachel, Moon of Marigolds, Glass Menagerie, Shadow Boxer. Everything that he directed was a celebration of an actor.
Yeah.
And if you watch Rachel, one of the things that separates it from a lot of like actors directing is it's just meticulously disciplined. I mean, it's like a little Romare film. It's concise, it's clear, it has and her work is brilliant. And he understood that. And that's, you said that he wasn't one of your top 100 actors. It's weird. He's not, if you don't look at the totality of it. It's the totality of their relationship. It's seeing Mr. and Mrs. Bridge in context of Long Hot Summer. That you go, wait a second, this is way better than I thought. Individually, you can like or dislike these given movies, but in its totality, it's overpowering.
Yeah. Right. And that's what you've given us. Yeah, you've given us. I also just want to go back in like a Cassavetes Generalins way of just like trying to study this great.
I got
great
into
love affair.
because in the actor's studio he was obsessed with Ben Gazzara. He loved Ben Gazzara's acting and everything like that. And I thought, when I saw Rachel, I was like, oh, he's copying Cassavetes. Like, oh, they're good. And then I realized, no, this came out before Woman Under the Influence. I'm like, so they're just the same generation. I mean, there's this great picture of Newman at one of the Oscars and Cassavetes is right behind him. I'm like, because you wouldn't think of them as brothers like that.
Right.
But you're like, no, that's, and Scorsese said that, like, Rachel, American independent cinema didn't really exist.
Yeah.
It was happening in that moment with Cassavetes, and Rachel is a part of that.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And their love affair, Jenna and Cassavetes' love affair, you always think of as this working thing, but people don't realize how much Paul and Joanne worked together. He says of himself, I didn't include it in that, but he says, I just don't have any magic as a director. And what he was always looking for is magic. Like, where is that thing that's something I couldn't have thought of? And when I was talking about feeling the current, I think that's when you're a performer and you do something you didn't plan on doing, you actually let the current take you. That's the thing that Newman was hunting for. That's what was so easily accessible to Joanne. And that's what the great directors do, like Scorsese. The greats, they know how to cultivate a current, how to invite it in, how to welcome it, how to build it, how to cut it, how to sustain it.
Yes.
Dylan's a great example of it. He just seems to make himself, through hard work, he seems to make himself available for inspiration constantly.
Somebody asks Paul Newman this in the documentary. It's an actual video. And I want to ask you this, and I think part of the reason why this is so good is you're not just a lover of actors. You're a great actor. You're a movie star, right? But you're also a student still.
Yeah.
You have the student spirit. And that's what we get to benefit from. All of that, But this is a particular question about the movie star aspect of this, spending 2 years or whatever you spent with, making a documentary about this movie star, being a movie star yourself. So he's asked, when your life is so much playing roles, it seems like the idea of being a movie star is another role to play. And he says, I feel that, but I don't play it.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have related to that.
By that
that's why you put that in, right?
Yeah.
Do you relate to that?
Yeah. He's talking about society's desire to make you see yourself in the third person, to start writing your obituary or writing your Rolling Stone profile as you live it and not living an authentic life. It's like, and I do feel that we're living, the thing about, it has its wonders and everything, but the thing about the internet that you think would bring people together and start encouraging truth, it's kind of doing the opposite. It's like creating two-dimensional portraits of ourselves and propagating more dishonesty to it. It just starts to feel like the Tower of Babel, It's like, and it's really confusing. Film criticism, for example, used to be really hard to get the job to be a legit film critic. You had to really be a good writer, and you had to really see a lot of movies, and you had to really understand the history of cinema, and you could really write about it. And now, man, if you just come up with some catchy sentences about X movie star or Y starlet or this, you can be a decent, you get a lot of hits on your blog or whatever it is, and they'll even run your quote above the poster, and it's, I really think that celebrity is a kind of poison, and you can sustain small levels of it, but if you drink a lot of it, you turn into Michael Jackson, Elvis, Brando. It's just, these are good, fine people who are great artists who just drank a shit ton of poison. Then the poison is ego, is seeing yourself in the third person. And when Newman said that, I love the way he says it too. I feel it, but I don't play it. And it's like, I understand everybody wants me to be quote unquote Paul Newman, but I'm actually a person. And I'm actually an actor. And I think he went to war against it. When you look at Judge Roy Bean, when you look at Slapshot, when you look at Buffalo Bill and the Indians, you see a guy angry at the role he's being asked to play. And he's just, he's shaking it. He's just wrestling with that yoke of Paul Newman. And I think, when I was younger, like people wanted me to be the poster boy for the Gen X. I can't tell you how many times I read that. I didn't know what that meant. I don't even know what that means, the Gen X. I didn't. Now I can kind of laugh at it, and I can, but I think it's like a formaldehyde. I meet these people who are successful sometimes, and it's literally like they're trapped in this glass jar of the year they were the most successful. Oh. They dress like it's 1992. They dress like it's whatever year they were. That they're stuck in that moment where they want to see themselves as this person. And the thing that Joanne says that I love is that we're just all changing. And I think the people who age well, the people you have to let yourself age. You are being asked to change constantly. And you've never been this person before, but as soon as you keep trying to be the person you were 4 years ago or 6 years ago or 12 years ago, or it's like you're just holding on to all this dead skin, and it's bad for you. And that's what I think he's talking about, is that mysterious third person. And so I think burning the tapes has to do with that. And he burned his tuxedo too. He just wanted to stop being public. And I find it really interesting that, isn't that fascinating that the time he started doing the most spontaneous work, I might say, is Nobody's Fool.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's very few artists that peak in their 70s, and if they are, it's usually writers or something, Tom Stoppard or somebody like, but actors to peak is very, very rare to peak that late. And really beautiful and really inspiring. And I think it's because he let himself keep growing up.
Yes.
He's also lucky as hell. To look like that in your 70s. It's also, that's just Newman's luck. It's just like, you drank like a fish for 50 years and he looks like that. That's not fair.
Ethan Hawke, thank you so much.
Thanks for caring. Thanks for having me on your show.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And thank you for ending it with that kiss. That kiss is amazing.
It's amazing. I remember when I saw that shot, I was like, okay, that's the end.